Right. Good afternoon. Hope you're all well. Any questions before I start? Anything from last week or about the module generally you want to ask? Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is two things. Going to finish off the slides on the service scape, which is from last week. So you'll want to go into last week's section on Blackboard and open that file. And then I've uploaded a couple of files to this week on CRM, customer relationship marketing, and including a case study as well. So you've got like both weeks you're going to be looking at. So last week and this week. And this is where we left off, I think, pretty much last week. We looked at this whole idea of both the physical and the digital servicescape. And this basically just shows the kind of, the scale from self-service to remote and kind of complexity of service, okay? And importantly, to always consider both the employees and the customers. Very often the focus is more on the customers, which is, of course, as it should be. However, in services, we also must think about the employees, because one of the characteristics of a service is something called inseparability. Can you remember what that means? Inseparability. So we've got intangibility, you remember, perishability. What do you think inseparability means? It basically means you can't separate. What is it that you can't separate in a service? Can you remember? I think I'm pretty certain Karen would have introduced you to those terms in the first couple of weeks, and it's in the textbook as well. So inseparability basically means that the delivery of the service and the consumption of the service happens simultaneously, right? So there's no separation. So obviously if I buy, I don't know, let's say I buy an electric vehicle, maybe it was made in the US or made in China or wherever it was made, I'm not part of that production, okay? But if I go to Costa Coffee, where I've just been, then the delivery of, I ordered a flat white and some snack, and that delivery was all happening simultaneously, right? Same here, what's happening right now. I've started the lecture, you're kind of, taking the information, and that's also inseparable. So pretty much every service, go to the hospital, go to see the doctor, go and get your hair cut, take your dog to the vet, it's all inseparable. Okay, and that's important because it means that the employees are an integral part of the service. And that's why they need to be highly motivated, well trained, they need to understand what the brand represents. They are effectively part of the servicescape. And later on, probably after the break, we're going to talk about CRM, customer relationship marketing, and to build loyalty among your customers, you must have the right workforce, the right staff to deliver the service. So do make sure you understand those basic fundamental characteristics of a service: inseparability, intangibility, perishability, and heterogeneity. They're all in the book. Karen, I think, has covered them in the first couple of weeks. So just make sure you're keeping up to date with definitions of key concepts and theories, particularly in the textbook. Just follow along chapter to chapter. I have told you last week which chapters are relevant in the textbook to to the topics I'm covering today. So it's up to you really to do the background reading, which can of course include watching the recording of the lecture as well, which I post every week afterwards. We looked at an example actually of a hotel chain called Yotel, Yotel, which is like a really kind of almost like entirely self-service hotel. Maybe you've been in some of those. You often find them in city centers where you go in and it's not maybe entirely self-service. There might be somebody on the reception desk, but pretty much everything is self-service. Your breakfast, checking into your room, whatever services you have are often self-service. All the way through to somewhere like the Ritz Hotel in London, which is just absolutely the other end of the spectrum of that. So services comes in many complexities. Then we've got here the role of the physical environment, right? So we're talking here about the servicescape. We're talking primarily about the physical servicescape, although of course we know there's a digital servicescape as well. What represents the digital servicescape? Remember we talked about it last week? What if you're a company, what is part of your digital servicescape? How do people interact with you if they're not doing it physically? What's the obvious way that they're doing it? Yeah, through the website, through any digital assets, really. It could be your LinkedIn profile as well. Very often if you're operating in business to business, in other words, if you're a business selling services to other businesses, your LinkedIn profile, certainly in this country, will be absolutely key. That's part of your digital servicescape. So how do you present yourself on LinkedIn? How does your profile picture look? Have you got good referrals from your clients on there? So that's your digital servicescape. So we need to be mindful of both our digital and our physical servicescape. I think I was saying last week that if you look at the Starbucks website, anyway, my impression was it wasn't really terribly impressive compared to some of the stores. It looked a bit kind of amateurish almost, like not particularly attractive website. So I feel that in a way there was a little bit of a mismatch between the physical and the digital servicescape. Anyway, this servicescape plays different roles. Okay, let's have a look at them. So the first one is, it acts as a kind of visual metaphor. In other words, it like represents what your brand stands for. Okay, excuse me. And they give an example here of Eurostar, the so-called golden age of travel. So, back before the low-cost airlines like EasyJet and Ryanair, probably even longer ago than that, rail travel was kind of like, it went through a golden age where people would take the railways. You have things like the Orient Express, like really luxurious rail travel. And then it kind of got a bit of a bad image, rail travel as being a bit of a kind of second rate next to air travel. Well, Eurostar, which has recently merged with one of the big French rail companies, has kind of had a bit of a redesign, and they've pulled on some of the kind of the brass, the kind of sort of more luxurious fittings, the way they equip the trains, the stations, because when you travel by Eurostar, you check in at King's Cross in Pancras in London. You've maybe been there, and so your whole experience from the kind of moment actually you book online to when you turn up and check in at the station, board the train, etc., etc. That's all part of that customer journey through the servicescape. And you need to be mindful of every kind of touch point that the customer has on that journey. And companies will go to quite significant lengths to understand how the customer interacts through that journey. Right. So sort of simple example, if you were working for Eurostar, you would probably want to be spending time in the station, just observing passengers as they come. What are they talking about? What are their frustrations? What are they like? Where are there any problems in the kind of process? Are there any kind of sticking points or blockages that they have? Of course, you can do market research. You can ask people to give you feedback directly. And of course, you can also keep an eye on what we call user-generated content, which is basically reviews. People leaving reviews on multiple websites and on social media as well, of course. So you need to be, you can't just redesign the servicescape and then just kind of cross your fingers and hope it's going to be okay. You have to keep, understanding your customer, getting customer insight. That's so important. And of course, AI helps with that. I mean, if you have hundreds, maybe even thousands of reviews about a service, that's pretty hard to analyze manually, but it's pretty easy to analyze with technology. and increasingly now with AI technology. So you can basically ask, what are the top 5 topics that our customers are talking about online? What are the 5 strengths? What are the 5 weaknesses? And you'll get a very, very quick, summary of that. And that's absolutely critical to redesigning your service scape. Okay, so the whole package, right? Also, ServiceScape kind of can facilitate. So I think I gave the example last week of Citizen M hotels, kind of like slightly, probably 4-star kind of hotels, probably. And they have these things called mood pads where you can control things in your room. So you can control the air conditioning, maybe operate the shower, order room service, find out what's on at the theater next to your hotel, blah, 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 lots of different things, all kind of controlled from within the room. Now that I think has a couple of advantages. One, it's kind of like, kind of funky, sort of trendy technology that people like, as long as they can work out how to use it, they might quite like that sort of technology. So that kind of fits with the brand identity of Citizen M, right? Being a little bit more boutique, targeting business travelers as well as leisure. So in some ways, that servicescape is in keeping with the brand. But the other advantage of something like that is that it might encourage people to spend more money while they're in the hotel. They might, want to order a meal, order a drink, order room service, etc., etc. So, which of course is important. So there are different advantages to having the servicescape. And then the third one is socialization. So kind of prescribes social roles and interaction. So if we think about, for example, Starbucks, I think I mentioned last week, Starbucks have this concept, the third space, where, for example, students or professionals can kind of linger and spend longer in Starbucks. They have these comfortable, sort of more kind of like lounge chairs. Whereas in McDonald's or Burger King, you're going to have these hard plastic chairs. They don't really want you to stay too long, right? Get in, order your burger, eat it, and leave. Fast food. Starbucks is trying to encourage a little bit of that kind of, it's a space where you can meet your friends, you can work, study, etc. And that's again why the servicescape encourages that. Okay, and then the differentiator. So I think I mentioned this already actually in my explanation, but oftentimes the servicescape can signal the segment you're targeting and the way you're positioned. Now, I think last week we talked about positioning. I think I asked you about the kind of value proposition, unique positioning, and that's very much a marketing term, right? So when we talk about the brand, where is it positioned vis-a-vis in comparison to your competitors? Every company, somewhere or another, should have a unique positioning statement. What's different about our service? How are we different from the competition? It could be on price. It could be on level of service. It could be on luxury. It could be on environmental sustainability, and so on and so forth. And that's why often you see in other marketing courses like brand marketing, you have these things called brand positioning maps. Now, if you don't know what one of those is, just make a note later on, just Google it, have a look, or go through some of the marketing textbooks you've got, and you'll see what that means. It's an interesting topic because there are many different ways in which you can position your brand differently than the competition. That applies to everybody. It applies to universities. It applies to airlines, hotels. Certainly every commercial service organization that needs to make money and needs to make a profit will be positioned. I keep doing that. So the servicescape is part of that unique positioning. Okay. That sort of physical layout says something different about what was that company trying to achieve? So this is an example of a bank in Malta that was, which again is a service business, right? And if you see banks, if you, and I don't know, who you bank with, but if you, and maybe all of your banking is remote. Maybe you guys never go into an actual physical bank, right? Probably everything you do is online. In which case, it's mainly the digital servicescape, isn't it? It's the usability of the app. How sort of user friendly is it? How efficient is it? But say you do go into a bank, how welcoming is it? Is the lobby attractive? Are the people friendly? Is the furniture modern? All of this, so it all kind of signals what the brand represents. So basically, your servicescape is a differentiator. Okay, so we talk about in marketing differentiation. How do we differentiate our service from the competition? So here we talk about the theory of what's called the stimulus organism response model, SOR model. So you'll find more information about this in the textbook, and there are a number of journal articles related to the SOR model. It's actually used in a lot of different studies. In fact, oftentimes students will actually use this theory as part of their dissertation. In fact, I have a student at the moment who's looking at the impact of AI on gambling, online gambling behavior, right? Particularly mobile gambling on your phone. Okay, what impact does AI and recommendations for how you should gamble? What impact does that have on behavior, right? So let's have a look at the theory in relation to the servicescape. Okay, so I think I've gone off for some reason. That's apologies for that. Went forward by itself. So if we think about first of all the stimulus, right? Right. So basically, in this case, the environment acts as a stimulus, right? You know what stimulus means? If something that stimulates you to do something. That's what the word means, to stimulate you to do something. And these can be physical factors, right? So, for example, they can be things like temperature, right? So, for example, here, there's probably some sort of air conditioning or temperature control in the room here. If it gets too cold, you're going to be uncomfortable. You won't want to concentrate. If it gets too warm, you'll get too sleepy. And then you won't want to study either, right? So we need to get the right temperature in the room. Also, the lighting has to be good, the technology, and so on. So there's a servicescape going on here in the room. And actually, just while I'm on that, I think personally, some rooms really lend themselves to study and other rooms don't. I think this is not a bad lecture theatre, actually. There's some worse ones than this, like really old fashioned ones. You feel like you're in a building from like 30 years ago. And particularly like seminars. If you're just having a small group, I know you guys don't do small study seminars, it's all lectures, but if you do a small study group, you have to have the right environment, right? If you have an open plan room with circular tables where people can sit around a table rather than all sitting in a classroom style, that lends itself then more to discussion, workshop, collaboration, blah, blah, blah. This is more like lecture mode where you're sat here, I'm at the front talking, you're listening, hopefully thinking and asking questions if you wish. So anyway, the layout, the temperature, things like maybe the music, right, can also play a role and can act as a stimulus, right? And you see it here. So, for example, things like smell, which is scent, the layout, and lighting. If you ever go around IKEA, in West Quay in Southampton, you pay attention on that because IKEA are very professional at the way they use layout, music, lighting, kind of the servicescape to encourage you to spend longer in IKEA The longer you spend, the better the chances you're going to spend more money. Okay, you might end up buying things you didn't intend to buy. That's what IKEA does to you, right? You think, oh yes, maybe I need this plant, so you buy a plant. You had no intention of buying a plant before, right? So if you think about then the next one, which is the organism. This is basically customers or employees, both customers and employees, right? And these are the people, customers and employees within the environment who respond to that stimuli. Okay, so this is about the people who respond, right? And they can have three types of responses. I'm just explaining the theory here. So the first one is cognitive, right? Which you can see here on the in the middle box, cognitive response, okay, to the stimuli. That could be, for example, let's say, for instance, you are, I don't know, let's say, for example, you want to, you need a lawyer, right, to solve some legal problem you have. And you go to the lawyer's office, and it's very sort of expensive furniture, very sort of neatly laid out. Everything's very professional. You may then be inclined to think, well, this is a good choice for me because this lawyer clearly is very organized, very professional, very successful. Therefore, he or she is going to be best to represent my needs. Right? So we have this kind of cognitive, mental reaction to these stimuli. Like when I had my dog and I taken to the vet, like the behavior of the vet, and maybe having their certificates on the wall, their degrees in veterinary practice, and all of that would reassure me that the vet is well qualified to look after my dog. Okay, so that's another example, and there's many examples. And by the way, as we go through these services things, you should think about your own services interactions. Right? I could ask you to do that, and I don't know if we'll have time. But if we don't actually do it in the class, pay attention on pretty much every time you have a service interaction. Whether it's me giving you the lecture, which is a service interaction, or maybe you go to the restaurant in the evening. Maybe you go to IKEA when you're down in West Key, or basically any service scape. Think about it. Think about what's going on. Think about how it's kind of stimulating you as a customer. Is it having a positive effect on you, or is it having a negative effect on you, and why? Okay, what is it about that? Because there's a very good likelihood that when you finish your degree and you get your first job, you may work for a service company, and you can then give them some advice based on what you studied here on how they could better design their service kit, both physical and digital. So these are kind of things you can take from the classroom, hopefully, and use in the workplace. There's also emotional, right? So it's not just cognitive, it's not just logical kind of reactions. There's also emotions kind of, implicated in that or involved in that. And it could be obviously positive emotions or negative emotions, right? So for instance, if you go into a coffee shop, as I did just before the lecture, it was cold outside. I just done like a 40-minute drive. I just kind of needed to sit down, open my laptop, have a quick look at a few things, emails, have a nice coffee, just relax. And so that was kind of an emotional attachment to the brand. We looked at the little video, didn't we, last week, with a girl who was starting uni, and then she got a message from her mum giving her a free coffee and all that. So there's those emotional aspects to a brand, to an experience, to a service. The thing is, you have to remember that companies spend a lot of money on advertising. Like Costa Coffee did it, what was it called? Something with heart campaign, advertising campaign. These advertising campaigns are really expensive. They cost a lot of money. If you then don't like back that up with a really good service experience, you've just wasted all your money on your advertising. Okay, there's no point spending all that money raising awareness of your brand, and then when you experience the brand, it's terrible. It's that you have to get all of these things have to be. So that's why marketing is so quite complex in a way. There's a lot of psychology. There's business, but there's psychology. So yeah, it's kind of what makes it interesting, I would say. Right, and then the third one then is physiological, right? So basically that the environment, the servicescape can cause physical responses. That can be comfort, it can be pain, or it can be ease of movement. So I'd say, for example, here, physiological is the example of the lecture theatre being the right temperature, the right lighting, noise, not like you don't want a lot of noise in here. You're trying to study, so on. So you have to create the right physiological environment as well, right? So we've got the stimulus that stimulates behavior by the customer and actually also by the employee. I nearly forgot the employee there. Remember, they are super important in services because of the inseparability factor. So we need to think about how our employees, creating a better servicescape for them, a better physical environment for them. Because the more comfortable and appealing that you create the environment for your employees, the better, the happier they are, the more motivated they are to come to work. Because they could be spending 8-9 hours, in that environment. And you need to make sure that it's really conducive to providing a good service. And then the last bit then is the response, right? So what kind of response does the servicescape initiate among customers, right? This basically determines how people behave. Okay, and there's different categories as you can see here. It can be positive, to stay and buy, or it can be maybe negative where they avoid or they leave. Okay, so for example, if it's positive, they might stay, explore, work, spend more money, and socialize. So I give the example of IKEA there, and of course, why Starbucks wants you to stay in the third space is order more coffee. Then maybe have lunch and just spend more money. And of course, they will be monitoring this carefully through various metrics: how long people stay, how much they spend, whether they have the app, the Starbucks app. There are these kind of metrics that you'll use to monitor. So all of this servicescape marketing we're talking about, it also has to come with its own set of criteria to measure whether or not it is effective. Okay, so yeah, basically the stimulus, the customer or employee, and then their response to that. Okay, and I think there's kind of three. I suppose these are just pretty much examples, really, to kind of back that up. So I've flown with Singapore Airlines a long time ago, but I didn't experience this. But they kind of release this scent in the aircraft to make people feel kind of feel good, feel relaxed, kind of uplifting. Also kind of clean. People get on a plane, and especially after COVID, people are a bit, I'm kind of sitting here with like 500 other people and breathing in what breathing in what they're breathing, and it's not the most healthy environment in the world, let's be honest. So having that kind of scent is a positive emotion, releases a kind of a sort of a positive feeling among passengers. And then arrangement of machinery, furniture, pathways. Again, that just brings to mind IKEA for me. I'm sure there's other examples, but they're really good at creating these kind of pathways, through the kind of furniture they have for the kitchen, the furniture they have for the bedroom, for the living room. They organize it in a very, in a very smart way, which basically influences people's search behavior and satisfaction. And of course, this also applies to websites. It's a whole business in its own right. People have careers in what's called user experience, or usability on websites. You have usability consultants or usability website agencies, who will advise you on the best layout for your website, how people navigate your website. And of course, the advantage of things like websites is with analytics, things like Google Analytics, for example, and other web analytics. You can track how people interact with your website. Okay, and that's also really important. So, for example, one of the things that's often recommended for website design, if you have a very clear call to action, what's called a CTA, call to action. So, a call to action might be something like, watch this video, or sign up for our newsletter, or click here for a 10% discount or special offer. These are all calls to action. It's basically asking the person to do something. Okay, because the logic, the psychology says that when you come to a website, you've probably only got seconds, a very short period of time to engage the user on your website. So you need to understand, what is it that's going to appeal to them? What call to action will be most effective in keeping that person to go deeper into the website? And of course, you can measure that. So you know exactly how many people clicked on that link. You know exactly how many people watched your video, maybe demonstrating your service, and so on and so forth. So you can, the advantage of a digital servicescape is you have more data at your fingertips to understand. That's not so easy to do in a physical setting like a coffee shop or a retail shop, or an airport, for example. It's not as easy. Okay, so the third one then is, kind of, this is an example where I think she has a store. I'm not a big shopper in Victoria Beckham stores. I'm going to be quite open and honest about that. But, she uses these kind of gold chains as artifacts to signal exclusivity, right? So hers is all about kind of fashion brand, and she uses these kind of gold chains around the shop to kind of, to sort of signal the kind of more upmarket nature of the brand. And lots of like high-end fashion brands do this, don't they? They kind of, they use artifacts, which are kind of like objects or maybe accessories or things where the clothes are laid out, that shows what their brand is about. I remember going into one particular store where they made a big play about the nature, the origins of the fabric that was used to make the clothing. So it came from like somewhere in Norway or somewhere in Scandinavia, and it was all about the kind of standard of the cotton they used, or the linen. I can't remember what material, or maybe it was leather. I can't remember the details. But essentially, it was really saying that we use authentic, sustainably sourced materials in our clothing, and that was partly a way to justify the high price tag for buying the sweater or the jacket. So there are ways that we can, and this is what they mean by signs, symbols, and artifacts. These are things that are a cue. A cue is like something that signals something, points to something being more upmarket or exclusive. Right? So we need to think about, how can we put cues signals, objects in our servicescape that are an indicator of the kind of service that we offer and the kind of product we're selling. Okay, I think this is kind of more of just a little bit, I guess, a bit more examples really of our own response, like what they call engineering the vibe. The vibe is like a feeling, right? Creating an atmosphere, creating a feeling, right? So, yeah, I think I've more or less explained these. This is, do you remember there was the stimulus and then there's the response to the stimulus. So we've got the cognitive response. So I gave the example where, if you go into a lawyer's office or an accountant, or you go to see your GP, your doctor, and they've got like a disorganized office, maybe it's not very clean, especially in a doctor's surgery. I think that would be quite unusual, but that would signal a non-professional service, right? And you may not want to pay for that service. And then we talked as well about seating. So, for example, hard seats in fast food restaurants. They don't want you to linger for hours in McDonald's or Burger King or KFC. They want you to get in, order your food and leave. It's fast food. Yeah, and then again, emotional feelings, exciting. If you go to a theme park like Disneyland, Paris, or Disneyland in the US, or all over the world, there's different Disneylands. They'll be trying to create a servicescape that's it's all about excitement, especially for kids and young families. It's all about keeping that sort of stimulus, creating that excitement vibe that you get in a theme park. And then you've got different types of people. You've got people who are screeners, right? So these are people who can experience high levels of stimulation, that could be noise, activity, without being significantly affected by them, right? In fact, they can screen out the environment. And this, by the way, is why you often get, organizations, service companies who are very aware of the impact that other customers will have on their experience. So, for instance, you've got resorts in the Caribbean there's one called Sandals, which is pretty much a couples only service proposition. So it's not for families, it's only for couples. In fact, you can't book it there if you are a group of single guys, like maybe it's 5 or 6 friends going, they wouldn't be able to book it. Or if you were young kids, you couldn't book it. It's only for couples. So it's kind of romantic getaways, romantic breaks. They need to create a servicescape that's all about relaxation, romance, enjoying the experience. And what they don't want is having, little kids jumping in and out of the pool, being noisy, spoiling everybody's atmosphere. Okay? There's other resorts that cater to them. And that's why, just it's worth repeating, in services, you have this thing called the servuction model. It's a strange word, SERVUCTION, servuction. It's in the textbook. And what that basically says is that it's not only the employees that have an impact on our experience, it's also all the other customers that are there in the coffee shop, in the resort, on the flight, in the hotel, on the train, in the hospital, whatever the setting is. Other guests, other customers, other users have an impact on us. I remember going to a restaurant near where we live, and it was just like a family meal. And I even said to the waiter, and it was pretty empty, but there was one big group of guys, like 10 of them in the corner, and they were all drinking quite a lot. They weren't being aggressive or anything, just being quite loud and telling jokes. And that's fine, it's no problem with that. But I didn't want to sit next to them, right? And there was no need for us to sit next to them because the restaurant was pretty much empty. And yet, where did the waiter put us? Yeah, you guessed, at a table right next to these guys. So I said to him, look, this is not. I wasn't complaining about the guys. I just said to the waiter, "Look, can you move us to that table because we want to have a chat and relax and have a conversations." And like he just didn't get it. He did it, but you could clearly see he didn't understand where I was coming from, and that to me is just a lack of training. That's a total lack of training in the staff. But he should have been trained first of all to listen to me when I actually explicitly said to him, I want to have a quiet table. He ignored it, right? And then when I told him that we needed to move, he should have apologized and said, "Oh yeah, sorry, I'll move you." None of that. It just went on. Like he was just not motivated. Probably not really enjoying his job, whatever. And that's the problem, isn't it? Because they're not highly paid jobs. Some of these service jobs. And then how do you motivate people? This is an issue as well. So okay, so we've got different types of people, and then we've got non-screeners who are more sensitive to their environment, right? And they find it harder to filter out things like noise or lighting and stuff. And that just it just applies to wherever you go, right? So I remember for one of my birthdays, we went up to London, and I quite like sort of jazz music and kind of blues music and all that sort of music. And there's a very famous club in London called Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club, and it's like been around for a long time. It's right in the middle of Soho, right in the centre of London. And when you go in there, you kind of go down into like a basement. It's kind of darkly lit, but they have kind of lights on the tables. They serve cocktails, and then they have like a kind of an open area here where the musicians play, and you're almost right like next to them, particularly if you're sat at the front. There's a lot of atmosphere. You really feel you're in like a kind of like a jazz club from the 1960s or something like that. The only thing that's missing is no smoke, right? Like a smoky jazz club, because you're not allowed to smoke anymore, which is a good thing. But the whole ambiance, the whole atmosphere is part of the experience. And that's what makes it Ronnie Scott's. That's what makes it famous. Not just the musicians, it's the whole package. It's the whole service-scape. Obviously the guys making the cocktails, they're doing all this, and they create nice atmosphere. So, and these things don't happen by accident. They're planned. And of course, what added to the experience was the other people who were there were clearly loved music and were there to hear the music. So you felt you were part of a community of people really enjoying the experience. If there had been people just having a loud conversation or speaking on their phone, or even worse, playing some bloody video on their phone while the musicians were playing, like they would have been told to shut up or leave, because that's just the kind of place it is. So you don't go there if you don't appreciate the experience, right? So you have to think about the kind of environment, the vibe you want to create in the and who your customers are. Who are they? Who are the people coming through the door? So yeah. So basically, we need to think about what behavioral output we're looking for, right? Do we want people to stay, explore, spend, affiliate? Affiliate just means, like what I said about Ronnie Scott's there, affiliate means you feel belonging to something. If you feel affiliated to something, you feel you belong to something. And you want people to affiliate with your company, your experience, whether it's a club like Ronnie Scott's or whether it's an airline like British Airways, or what, it doesn't matter. Whatever the service is, you want to get people's affiliation, because obviously they'll come back. If I go up to London again, I don't go every time, but I might be interested to go again. So affiliation is important. You obviously refer to other people. So referral, of course, is the most influential type of marketing that exists, is referral marketing. If you can create brand advocates, right? An advocate is somebody who will literally advocate for your brand. They will speak highly of your brand. They will recommend it to other people. That's what it means to be a brand advocate. And I'm sure if you think about your own behavior, I'm sure there are certain brands that you buy repeatedly. Or, I don't know, if you were thinking of buying a phone or a laptop or a coat or a pair of shoes, you might have a certain brand in your mind because you feel an affiliation to that brand, and then you are an advocate of that brand. And once you create brand advocates, in some ways, your marketing is already done for you because your customers will just do the marketing for you much better than you could do it yourself. And actually, it means you can save money by not having to do lots of big advertising campaigns and so on. If you think about brands like, Patagonia. Patagonia is a brand that, have a quick look at the website, is a kind of brand that has a strong, like loyal following, I guess you might say. Yeah, so they're like an outdoor clothing brand. Patagonia, the name comes from South America, but you sort of get it. You get an immediate sense of. So there you go. I was talking earlier on about a call to action. Well, one's just literally popped up on the screen when I was talking. There you go. That's a call to action. It's asking you to join our community. How do you join? You pop in your email address and you sign up, and then obviously in the small print, I consent to Patagonia processing my email and sending me emails, etc., etc. Right? You're giving permission to Patagonia to send you offers. That's a call to action in that sort of digital service. And of course, you can measure that. I'm going to close this because I don't want to do it. They know that I've just closed it, right? There's a user right now on the website that's closed that box. You can actually do a live view of website visitors. They don't know it's me personally, Philip Alford, whatever my address is in Southampton. They don't know that, but they know that there's a live user on right now and what they are looking at. And so you can track a load of things. And if you scroll down, it's very easy to quickly see what the brand represents through its imagery, and I think they do a good job at doing that. But actually, if you go to the bottom of Patagonia's website, there are cues, right? Do you remember we talked about these artifacts? These are like digital artifacts, signs, signals, cues, CUES, a cue, right? We guarantee everything we make. We take responsibility for our impact, explore our footprint. It's like your carbon footprint. We support grassroots activism. We keep your gear going, right? You can actually bring jackets back because they're quite expensive, and they will repair them and not try to sell you another one, but try to make sure that the one that you ordered, you can keep it for as long as possible. Now that seems a bit crazy. Like, why don't they just try and sell you another one? Because they're not fast fashion, right? That's not their brand positioning. They're not Temu or Primark or Shein fast fashion. They are an upmarket brand that stands by their expertise and professionalism. Okay, and they would rather have you loyal for the long term than try to sell you a bunch of stuff in 1 week. That's where their brand is positioned. Okay, so we give our profits to the planet. So we give. I mean, I won't go into the details here. You can have a look maybe in your own time, but these all signal that Patagonia is a brand that cares about the environment. Which makes sense, because if you look at all the images, it's all about the natural environment, whether it's diving, climbing, skiing, fishing, whatever, right? It all depends on having a good natural environment. So, in a way, they are advocating protection of the environment, which is the reason they sell their clothing and equipment. So it makes perfect sense. And I'm sure it's been a while, but I don't even know, it's probably in London. If you went into a Patagonia store, you would probably have the same kind of vibe or artifact signals in the physical store that you would have on the website. So there would be nice images of, people climbing the mountains or skiing down the snow, whatever it is. You would also have people working in a Patagonia store who themselves are either climbers, skiers, mountaineers, whatever, people who know what they're talking about. So that's all part of the brand as well. Okay, so it's the whole package really that you need to think about when you're thinking about the servicescape. Okay, I think we're nearly finished this one, and then we'll take our break shortly. But what else did I want to say here? Yeah, I mean, I thought this was I hadn't heard of this before, but case study here, an example, Tyne and Wear, right? You probably haven't heard of that. You've probably heard of Newcastle on the northeast of England, right? There's a place called Newcastle. It's quite like a big town. That's Tyne and Wear. That's the area of England, northeast. So they'd obviously had some problem with, quote, antisocial behavior. These are like youths, probably like teenagers hanging around, causing trouble, bored, I don't know, putting graffiti on the walls, making life uncomfortable for people there, just not very nice. So so we've got stimulus, organism, behavior, right? So the stimulus was play classical music at railway stations or bus stations, like Mozart, right? Because this music was actively disliked by these probably many young guys hanging around. They didn't want to listen to Mozart, that's for sure. So actually, they then there was evidence to suggest they would avoid the area where the music was playing, which is exactly what you want. You just want them to go somewhere else. So this is an example where I guess it's like a city authority using a stimulant to have a response, in this case from people they didn't want hanging around railway stations and bus stations. So I thought it was quite interesting. It's like crowd control in a way as well. Yeah, so we talked about the virtual servicescape, haven't we already? But I guess, taking that further, and technology is moving so fast. You've got the Apple glasses, you've got augmented reality, virtual reality. This technology and AI is just, growing and expanding so quickly. But this is an example from a number of years ago already, actually. But it's more the principle where you can use the IKEA Place app to kind of see what that chair would look like in your room, kind of through an augmented reality. Okay, so it's kind of thinking about, because you might see like a nice table or a nice chair or a nice bed in IKEA, but you don't know what it would look like in your room, or you don't know what it would look like in a certain like setting. So you can use this augmented reality to see, okay, well, that's where it would fit. That's the lamp. It's in the corner. Yeah, that works. That's okay. So it's kind of giving you an opportunity to place the product where you could put it in your house. Okay, so it kind of helps with VR is about immersion, virtual reality about being there. AR, augmented reality is more about looking at how it would look in the room. Okay, so virtual extends beyond just a website. It can be something that's kind of almost used with the physical and the digital and the virtual coming together more. So just coming into the last few slides now, and then after the break, we'll go on to CRM, customer relationship marketing. But we need to think about blueprinting, and I think Karen has she done some service blueprints with you? I think in the first couple of weeks. Maybe it seems like a long time ago now, but if you go back over your notes or her slides, I'm sure I saw some things on service blueprints, right? So I won't try and cover that because she's already covered it, and it's also in the book quite extensively. But this is a good example of where you need to create a blueprint to think about what is it that we want to achieve strategically, right? As a brand, okay. So, for example, we could use photographic blueprints for physical spaces. We could start to think about, okay, we want to lay out the Patagonia store. We want to replicate or capture what we've got on our website. These lovely images, different types of outdoors experiences that people want. Do we create unique spaces in the store for those, or how do we lay out the clothing? Do we have like certain smells in the shop, because we want to appeal to everybody's sense, touch, smell, etc., sight, sound, and what have you. So we need to kind of appeal to all the senses. So we could look at sort of kind of photographic blueprinting. When somebody comes into the store, where might they go? What would customer journeys through our store look like? Could be the same in a hotel. If you want to redesign your hotel lobby, how do you do that? How do people flow through the lobby? Where do people spend time? Oops. Do we want them to stay? Do we want them to, be able to kind of relax in the lobby, or do we want to be more efficient? We just want them to get to the reception, check in, go to their room. Or do we want them to stay in the lobby and spend time there? Because that can create a very nice atmosphere for the guest. Because one of the nice things about a hotel lobby, if it's done properly, is it's a nice place to be. There's a kind of hustle and bustle. People coming and going. Having a drink, having a coffee in the lobby. It creates an atmosphere, makes the hotel look like it's kind of warm and welcoming. Whereas if it's a cold, empty lobby, it can have the opposite effect. Again, it depends on your brand and who you're appealing to. Okay, so, and then there's this thing called wireframes. Again, you can Google that in your own time, but wireframes are used to plan out websites. Okay, so before you even do anything online, you might even just do a wireframe on a whiteboard, like here. You might just decide, over here to do a wireframe for your website. What does my homepage look like? Where do I have the images? Where should I put the video? Where should I, if you think about that Patagonia website, they will have carefully planned the navigation and the layout of that website to absolutely enhance the user's experience. And that layout will be based on the analytics and the data they've got from how people interact with the website. If it's a totally new website, you obviously don't have that data, so you have to get together as a team. Maybe you have 4 or 5 people from your marketing team or other teams. You come together and you think, what do we want to achieve for this website? What's the story that we want to tell? What's the calls to action? How do we represent our brand on the website? What are the cues? What are the artifacts on the website? We care about the planet. How do we tell that story? And so on and so forth. So wireframes, worth having a look at that, because there's a good, there's also a very good likelihood that in your first job, you'll be doing something, especially if you have a marketing job, you'll be doing something with the website or the social media. So having kind of using wireframes to kind of look at how it's laid out can be a very low cost, almost no cost really, way of planning and testing your website. You shouldn't just build a website and then that's it. Just I'm done. Move on. Websites are kind of living, breathing things. They need to be redesigned from time to time. Just the way in a hotel you need to replace the carpets, replace the beds, replace the furniture because it wears out. On a website, you need to think about. I don't mean you change it every week, but you need to think about the design and where you're positioning things on the site. So we need to think about, opportunities. I think I mentioned last week about this idea that we should never overpromise and underdeliver. Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you remember that. So we could, for example, if we have very, very impressive posh decor, like gold or silver, sound great, but very nice fabrics and quite expensive like decor and maybe tiling on the floor, all that, and yet the service is really second rate and kind of low level. There's a mismatch there. Your decor and your physical servicescape is saying one thing, but the service you receive is much lower. So you have to make sure that there's a good match between them. Yeah, again, we know that styles can date. I think I mentioned last week that nowadays in the home, people are used to having really high tech TVs, like state of the art refrigerators, all the rest of it, so that when you go to a hotel or an Airbnb, your standards are higher because of what you have at home. So you have to kind of like keep thinking about modernization and so on. And oftentimes then you need to have people with different functions within the organization having an input into your servicescape. So it could be human resources, for like staff uniforms. It could be people who deal more with operations, like your equipment, purchasing. What carpets do you want to purchase? What type of pillows do you want to purchase for your hotel? And then for the digital servicescape, it's web design. So typically, if you're designing a servicescape, whether it's physical or virtual, you want to have input from different people within the organization, because marketing is one of those disciplines that crosses everything within the business. That's the kind of difference I think about marketing from other disciplines. So just to it's the penultimate slide here. So just to kind of finish off here, think about the overall package. Think about how does the layout facilitate your customers and your employees? How does it differentiate your brand? And are you consistent across the physical and the digital servicescape? So I won't ask you to do this now, but you can think about this just for your own personal purposes, or you can discuss it with your classmates. But think about your favorite restaurant, if you have one. Maybe you don't have a favorite one, but whether it's here or in your home country, what's your favorite restaurant and why? Is it to do with the lighting, the noise? Sure, it's also to do obviously with the food, but there could be other things that influence the fact that you go back to that restaurant or you stay longer in that restaurant. What is it about it? Or think about a lean service, like using a dry cleaner, right? Which is, not a high touch service, and compare that to a more elaborate service. I hope you don't have to go to the hospital for obvious reasons, but you can think about, I don't know, maybe you've signed up with a bank here in Southampton or in the UK because you need to kind of sort out your banking, or maybe your mobile phone. Maybe you're with EE or one of these other providers in the UK. What kind of service do you get? I think that's a more elaborate service, more complex. Reflect on your experiences. I'm sure some of you have had bad experiences and you've had to complain and sort out, and it's really time consuming and quite a hassle. Some of you may have had a really great experience. When you do have a great experience, think about why you think it's great. Did you have low expectations and suddenly they exceeded your expectations, and why? What was it that helped them to exceed your expectations? You should reflect on that when you're doing services marketing. And it was just some follow up reading afterwards. Okay, so I think we'll take a break there, guys. It's bang on, well, more or less, just gone 2 o'clock. So we'll start again just after 10 past. And then that will give us about half an hour or so, 35 minutes, to look at CRM, customer relationship marketing, which I think is about right about chapter 7 of the textbook. I did put that up at the beginning, the seats one, the for attendance. Yeah, I'll do it again. It's okay. By the way, just to let you know, if you do want to listen again to the lecture on the recording, or you miss a lecture, just bear in mind that because of the Panopto thing I'm using at the moment, I don't want to pause it, so there'll be like a 10-minute break where you can just skip forward, and you know, just to let you know that. And I put it on YouTube, and then I'll share the YouTube link with you so you can watch it. Okay, let's move on to talk about customer relationship marketing. Now, I just discovered actually that I had a couple of definitions which I hadn't put, I'd forgotten to put on the slide deck that I've shared with you on Blackboard. So this one isn't on there. Now, obviously, it'll be captured on my recording, which I'm recording at the moment. But if you want to take a picture of the definition, or you can do, it's completely up to you. Just to let you know, this isn't on the slides that are shared. But this is, I mean, you'll find lots of definitions of CRM in many places, but this one's from a company called Gartner that does a lot of kind of consulting and research. And they define CRM, customer relationship marketing, as an enterprise wide strategy designed to optimize profitability, revenue, and customer satisfaction by organizing the company or the enterprise around segments, encouraging or fostering customer satisfying behaviors, and linking processes from customers through suppliers. Right. So it's a bit, to be honest, it's a little bit wordy. It's a little bit, it's a bit too long, in my opinion. I've got another one now, which is a little bit shorter. But there are a couple of things there which I will come back to in a few minutes. But this idea that CRM is enterprise wide, right? So I mentioned earlier, didn't I, with the service scape, that it involves many disciplines across the organization: HR, operations, digital team, the marketing communications team. So customer relationship marketing similarly involves really all elements of the business. Okay, so typically you think about a hotel operation, right? We know the employees are so important to satisfying customers and keeping them loyal. And that's kind of where training and motivation recruitment comes in. We know that having the right service scape is important to keep people loyal. That's where purchasing comes in, right? So CRM covers the whole enterprise, but it is about optimizing loyalty, customer retention, which leads to more profitability, higher revenue, and of course, importantly, under promising and over delivering. So always keeping customers satisfied, happy, wanting to come back for more, right? So that's one definition. Then another definition, which again also isn't in your slide, so apologies for that, but you can just pick it up in the recording here, or you can take a picture. So this is a little bit simpler from Forrester, another market research company. It's the business processes and technologies. I don't think the other one mentioned technology. So, there is a whole raft, a whole kind of range of marketing technologies that are concentrated on CRM, customer relationship marketing. One of them, which I'm going to use an example of, I think I'll get to it, hopefully, with an airline example, is a company called Salesforce. Right, and you can have a look. I think I've got their website open actually, because I was going to use the example later, but I can just show you now. Yeah, there we go. So that's an example of a technology company, Salesforce, really big company. I think they're originate in the US, but they're global. That where they say, as they say, humans and agents, and in this case they mean AI agents, drive customer success together. So you can see here that they transform sales, service, etc., uniting apps data on one trusted platform. Every department is an engine for growing customer success, and so on and so forth, right? So Salesforce, the number one AI CRM. And if you scroll down, you'll see their various solutions, AI for marketeers, even for small businesses, AI agents. So you can see here a huge emphasis now in marketing on AI. Not surprising. AI agents in particular, as a kind of a way of automating marketing processes and in driving more customer personalization, giving people a more personalized, tailored experience based on their data, their profile, and so on. So this is an example when on the definition they talk about the technologies. That's an example of one of the technologies. So my advice to you, when you have time, is to have a look into the Salesforce website, to spend 10, 15 minutes scrolling it, have a look at the solutions, or choose a company. Even I don't know what your plans are after you graduate. If you're staying in the UK, you want to go back to China or whatever country you're coming from. In those, wherever you go, like especially in bigger cities, there will be agencies specializing in technology for marketing. If I was in your shoes, I would check them out. What do they do? What services do they offer? How do they enable marketing? How do they enable some of the theory that you've been hearing about? Because let's be honest, in the lectures, it's not all theory. I try to give examples as well, but you're not out there programming your own kind of AI solution to something, right? So, but what you're learning is some of the principles and the strategies of marketing. But you need to go further than that, because you need to kind of think about how will technology enable that, right? So Philip's or Karen's talking about personalization. How does technology help a brand personalize the experience or the service to the customer? And this is where you can start to look into some of the technologies. And of course, you know this. AI is huge. In countries like China are ahead of the UK, or ahead of the US even, in terms of building AI solutions. Like the AI race, the global AI race is on, right? Who's going to win the race? They're always on about this. who's going to win the race? Is it going to be Europe, China, the US? It's all that. Unfortunately, they often talk about that in my opinion in negative terms. I think we do better if we all had a bit of collaboration and cooperation together. But there we go. But as far as you're concerned, as marketing students, you should be thinking about how CRM technologies, AI-driven technologies, can enable and facilitate some of this good services marketing that we're talking about. Okay, and you probably have to do a bit of that outside of class time, in your own time. That's just the way it is, because there's so much to learn. You can't cover it all in 2 hours each week. Okay, and I think I said to you last week, there's lots of really good AI stuff happening at the uni. There's centers for AI excellence, in computer science. There's, I think, an AI society. Southampton is quite well known for AI research. I think it would be very interesting for you to meet some of the kind of AI students, what they're working on, and look at kind of what their work, what their solutions look like. Could they be used for marketing? So try to use the time here when you're at the uni as productively as you can. Optimize your time here and get as much out of it. That's my advice to you. So anyway, so all of this supports activities of, and here's the kind of theory now: targeting customers, acquiring them, retaining them. Right. So CRM is all about retention, customer retention, keeping customers. And then understanding, but also collaborating with customers. So, companies like Starbucks will invite people to, send in suggestions for what they think would be like an amazing coffee. Right? Other brands, like I used the one last week of Threadless, where people can put in their own designs for shirts, and other users can vote what they think is the best kind of solution. So we can actually collaborate with our customers. I remember, I'm no longer in the position, but for about 10 years I was on the board of a tourism company, because I have a background in the hospitality and tourism and leisure sector. And we were redesigning the website for the region, right? It's kind of like tourism to bring tourists to the area. And so I set up, there's a platform called Idea Scale, like the word idea, like to have an idea, and scale, ideascale.com. And there was a free trial of it. And I just asked hotels and other clients of the company that were based in the region what type of website they would like. Okay, so and I asked them to recommend or to suggest examples of websites they really liked and why they liked them, and then I got other people to vote, which one did they think was the best. So that's an example of collaborating with your customers. So what I would encourage you to do is to think about your customers are a good source of ideas. They shouldn't just be somebody you sell to. They often are times when you might ask them for their suggestions, their ideas, and so on. Okay, so that's another good reason for CRM, having a loyal community. Like Patagonia, to come back to them, if that's okay, is a good example, because they have generally a loyal brand following. And those are kind of people who will give feedback to Patagonia on whether it's hiking boots or skis or technical equipment for climbing, whatever it is, they can be a source of ideas and feedback. Okay, so that's okay. And now we'll get on to the actual slide deck that you've got on Blackboard, right? So now you don't have to take a picture of these, because you have these slides in your on Blackboard. So I want to talk a little bit about the kind of strategy of relationship marketing. And here we're moving, beyond software. You often used to hear more with CRM, oh, it's technology, it's software. It's so much more than that. I always encourage you to think about technology as an enabler. Okay. So while I did encourage you to look at Salesforce and maybe other AI technologies that will facilitate CRM, you should never fall into the trap of thinking, well, all I need is a good technology solution, then that's it. CRM is a much more holistic strategy for the whole organization, involving the service scape, involving employee training and motivation, involving the right equipment, involving the right brand messaging, the right website design, the right ad campaigns. The whole thing it's part of a kind of holistic, holistic statement, holistic strategy. So, for example, you might have a list of all your loyal customers' emails. So you want to engage in effective email marketing. Right? And there will be email marketing technologies that specialize in exactly in email marketing. And you want to think about, what kind of emails do I want to send? What's the message? How often do I want to send them? How do I measure them? How do I track users' behavior? There's so many elements to CRM. It's a whole strategy for the whole company, right? So it's not just about technology, but I would argue that you couldn't do it without technology. And increasingly, this idea of AI agents is actually very interesting. I think it was kind of a little, not a joke, but it was like a sort of a challenge where I think it's the guy who set up OpenAI, Sam Altman, and a few other guys in the US who sort of discussed this idea that you could have $1 billion company with one employee because the whole thing would be run by agents, AI agents. I don't think that's a very nice look at the future, because if you've got companies that are only run by one person, what the hell does everybody else do? Do we all just sit around and eat food and relax? We need to work. People need to work. And I still believe in this saying. It's a very kind of well-used saying now. It's called the human in the loop. Maybe you've heard of it. So very often when you go to AI presentations, somebody will say, we still need the human in the loop, right? So you still need a human in the loop because you cannot rely 100% on AI. AI still doesn't have that emotional insight, for example, that we have as people. AI still gets it wrong, as I'm sure you know. It hallucinates, right? That's what it's called when ChatGPT makes things up, or Gemini makes things up. It's called hallucination. It's an AI term. So when AI hallucinates, they get it wrong. And that's maybe okay if you're just asking ChatGPT something simple, but what happens if AI is controlling other things and it gets it wrong? That could be kind of scary. What happens if AI is flying your plane? It gets it wrong, and then that's like life or death, right? So need to think about that. So let's have a look at this idea then of a kind of blueprint for customer retention. So let's think about, first of all, and by the way, I go into some of these in more depth in the next few slides. So first of all, as I said, CRM is a whole strategy, right? Top left. Okay, it kind of shifts the focus from acquisition to retention. Because in the past, marketing, sales was all about more and more customers, more customers. Now we're thinking as much, if not more, about retention. And that's not, partly that's because it's increasingly difficult to keep acquiring new customers all the time, right? Because there's so many people competing for new business there's so much noise online that it's very hard to cut through the noise and reach somebody. And so, and also if, if people are having economic difficulties, they don't have as much disposable income, they'll be less likely to go to a new provider. They might stick with somebody who they know and trust. So retention, okay? And then we need to think about this kind of bucket theory, which is in the textbook. We need to, as they say, plug the service hole, right? Because very often what happens is companies will do a lot to recruit new customers, but they will let them go. They will not actually, retain those customers. A good example is online, actually, on websites. So, companies spend a lot of time and effort to get you to come to their website, right? They do what's called search engine optimization. Maybe you've heard of that. Yeah, where if somebody types something into Google, you come up top. And now, of course, it's about AI, isn't it? Because what comes up to the top of Google or whatever search engine you use, may not be Google, you often get an AI results. So how do you influence the AI to get to the top? Now that's a different lecture, that's a different module, but that's something you also want to look at. Digital. Are you doing digital marketing module? I guess you must be. Right. So I would expect you to be covering it there. If it's not covered, you should ask. Don't tell them I told you to ask, right? Because I don't want to annoy my colleagues. But there's something called SEO, search engine optimization. There's also something called GEO, generative engine optimization. And that's how you, not so much influence, but that's the steps you can take to be included in the AI content at the top of the search. That's slightly different than SEO, okay? So just mentioning that to you, it's not part of my lecture, but it's something you should be aware of, because that whole search landscape is changing because of AI. And a lot of people, they don't even go to the results down the screen, they just read what the AI says and then they follow a link from there. Okay, so that's changing that whole landscape significantly, right? So, but what happens sometimes when you go to a website, you think, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's the camera I want. Yeah, I'm looking for a new digital camera, maybe that's the one I want. So you start going through the steps. You put it in your shopping basket, you put in your address, you put in your payment details, whatever it is. And suddenly it goes wrong, right? It's not a smooth process. Lots of people are leaving, maybe they only go through steps 2 out of 5 and then they leave the website. Now you know that people are leaving your website because you can see it on your analytics, on your website analytics. And you can see that for every 100 people that go into the funnel, the shopping, maybe 95 of them drop out after the second step. That tells you something's wrong with your checkout process. They don't like it. Why do they not like it? Well, you can do some consumer research to find out. But that's a good idea where you've got a leaky bucket. People are falling out of the bucket. You pour the water into the bucket, it's got a hole at the bottom, all the water leaks out. That's essentially what you're doing. You're leaking customers. And for every customer you leak, you're losing a lot of revenue. Okay, and it's the same thing with loyalty, with customer relationship, customer retention, retaining your customers, right? They might love your hotel, they might love your spa, your lobby, your gym, your rooms, but they don't like the service they got. Somebody was very rude to them on reception, right? Treated them badly or, whatever. They might just not go back to the hotel again. You have lost a lot of revenue. And it's not just, you haven't just lost one sale. That's the thing about CRM. You've lost what's called lifetime value. So remember that. I won't get through all my slides, I just realized, but I'll come back to them in our next session, but I'll get through a few more. But one of the things I want to talk to you about is customer lifetime value. Now, that suggests that literally our lifetime, from when we're born to when we die. I don't mean that. I mean, customer lifetime could be maybe 5 years, 10 years. It could be the amount of time you spend with your bank, right? So you sign up for your bank, like I'm with the Nationwide, and I've been with them for a lot of years. And over the years, I've had loans, I've had a mortgage, I've had insurance, I've had like insurance for other members of the family, on and on and on and on. So what I've done is I haven't just bought one product from Nationwide, I've bought multiple products. And the whole time they're making money from the relationship with me. And that's why banks and financial institutions are some of the ones who've practiced CRM the longest, because lifetime value really does apply for banking. Because you think about you yourself right now, you're a student, right? Maybe you've got a loan or you're getting money from different places, you're paying your fees, you're doing this. So your needs are like this, right? Then maybe you leave uni and you start your first job. You've got your first wage, your first pay packet. You're putting money in. Maybe you're deciding to invest your money somewhere or get some savings. Then maybe you decide you're going to have a family, you have one or two kids. Things change. You buy a house, maybe you get a mortgage, you have to, maybe you get a child's account for your kids, or, so as your life stage changes, your behavior changes. And that's why lifetime value for things like banks and financial institutions is really important. But it applies not just, it applies to, also, the case study I've got, which I'll probably have to show next time, is from a hotel. So hotels have things called guest loyalty programs, like Marriott hotels, Hilton hotels, right? These are big global hotel chains that do a number of things to try and keep you loyal to their hotels. Okay, so the bucket. We don't want leaky buckets, right? We want to plug the hole in the bucket. We also need to be, quite disciplined, right? So sometimes we have people in our loyalty program who actually, it's costing us to communicate with them and keep their records. In fact, they're no longer useful to us. They're no longer staying with us, buying from us. So sometimes you have to end the relationship. That makes sense. And then relations are not, they're not static. They go through different stages and there's different bonds. And I'm going to talk about this in a later slide, this bottom left one. That's the slightly more complicated one, right? We'll get to that, hopefully, if not in this session, in my next one with you. Just so I guess really what CRM is saying in many ways is we're shifting from the emphasis on one-off single transactions to this idea of long-term lifetime value, repeat purchases. And there's this kind of saying in CRM that we can cross-sell and upsell. So like if somebody books, if you go on to British Airways and you book a flight, say to Shanghai or Beijing or to New York or to Paris, or wherever it is, you're booking economy, they'll try to upsell you to business. They'll say for an extra €200 or £200, you can upgrade to a business class seat, for instance. Or, based on your profile, say for example, you have stayed many times with a certain hotel chain, like as a business traveler, they will have data about you. They will know what kind of room service you like. They will know what kind of in-room entertainment you like. They will know what kind of sports facilities in the hotel you use. So you can start to communicate with your guest, with your customer, to try and encourage them in a good way to maybe stay longer, buy more things while they stay in your hotel or fly with your airline. Okay, so and again, back to the bank. Your bank will try to sell you a service that they think would fit your needs. Okay? So they might know that you've now suddenly got young children in your family, or they might know that you're looking to buy a house, and they'll try to sell you a mortgage product, and they may give you advice on that, like a service. So remember that products and services often come together, right? So if I'm buying a financial product from a bank, like a mortgage, that's a product. But there's always a service wrapped around the product. I can maybe chat online, maybe it's with an AI chatbot. Please tell me more about your mortgage product. Certainly, here we go, blah, 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 blah. Would you like to speak to a human agent? Yes, please. And they'll give you some advice and support. So products and services often come together. Like buy a car. You buy an electric vehicle somewhere, and you might want to get advice on the range of the vehicle, how the best way to charge it. I don't know. Accessories, again, can you get a different color, different upholstery, whatever it is. There's always a service that comes, most oftentimes, there's a service that comes with the product. So we talked about the leaky bucket already. I think this is pretty much just a kind of emphasizing that. So things like poor service, unmet expectations will cause the leaks. Lost customers and churn. Churn means churning around, all right? So you all the time you're having to get more customers in because you keep losing customers. So you have this like very expensive customer churn. So if you're not keeping your customers, they're not buying from you again, it's a sign that something isn't right with your service, with expectations. And remember that customer acquisition costs money. Sales and advertising costs money because you have to build all the time brand awareness. You have to all the time tell your customers what you stand for. Whereas if you keep them loyal, they already know about you. They don't have to search you up on Google. They know about you. They might just go directly to your website. They might not even bother going to your website. They may just contact you directly by email or by phone or whatever means. So you can cut out all that expensive sales and advertising. So CRM, customer relationship marketing, is also a way to save money as well as try and generate more profit through upselling and cross-selling. Yeah, I think I'll finish with this one, guys, and then I'll finish the other ones off in a subsequent session. But essentially, what we're trying to do is from acquisition through to retention. Is we're trying to move customers from being total strangers to being like, let's say, acquaintances. We kind of know them, to being friends. I'm just using a metaphor here, like if you met people, and then like where you kind of know your friends, you kind of know their behavior and a lot about them, and then almost they become partners. And this is where you're kind of almost moving right through the kind of mechanism from no awareness through to kind of almost your customers are almost like partners. They're suggesting how you can improve your service, improve your product. And this is important. I want to leave you with this thought. You shouldn't think about CRM as only being B2C, business to consumer. I've mentioned things like hotels, airlines, banks. That's mainly business to consumer. But you may end up working for a company that sells services to other companies, B2B, business to business. And that's a huge part of marketing. And it's different because it's not about volume. It's about the quality and the depth. You're not going to have as many customers in B2B, but the ones you do have will spend a lot more money with you. Because B2B services tend to be much higher value than selling a shirt or selling a pair of trainers or even selling a laptop. So in a B2B setting, you may then really want to have customers which almost effectively become your partners. You have such a long, trusted relationship with them. And there's a thing called, I think it was way back to Michael Porter, the strategy professor who talked about switching costs. What he meant by that was, if you raise the switching costs, you make it a lot more inconvenient for people to switch to a competitor. That's what you want to do. You want to have high switching costs so that customers want to stay with you. They're loyal to you. You know them and they know you. And actually for them to go to a competitor will take them time and effort, and in B2B, time and effort is money. So if you are, for example, a company like Salesforce that sells software solutions to other companies, the more connected you get, the harder it is for the customer to disconnect, because they have spent so much time telling you about themselves, telling you what their strategy is, what their objectives are. They're happy with your technology solution. They're happy with the advice you give them. Why would they go somewhere else? Maybe even if you screw up one time and get something wrong, they'll think, okay, not ideal, but actually, if I was to move and like uncouple from this agency, it's going to cost me an awful lot more hassle and time, and I don't want that hassle and time. I want to get on with my own business. So that's where you want to get. In the B2B, you want to get to that really in sort of integral, interconnected partnership. Okay, so just to leave you then, think about that. We're not just talking B2C here, we're talking business to business. Okay, that's it for today, guys. And I will pick this up again in the next week. I think Karen's probably next week, but maybe that'll be the week after, but whichever. We'll finish off CRM and move on to the next thing. But for the time being, I'm pretty certain it's chapter 7 within the textbook for the kind of follow-up reading of CRM. So do have a look at that. And probably tomorrow, I'll upload the YouTube link for the recording for today's lecture if you want to drop into any bits of it. Okay, so have a good day and see you soon. Thanks.